because they're blown out of proportion in our own minds. Instead, we think they really are all important. And here's the point. Because we believe this, we assume other people have recognized their importance as well and also make them a priority. In other words, blacks who place race at the center of their being will assume that whites would, recognizing the importance of this factor, also do the same thing. And this explains a lot. It explains why a black man who hears a white guy utter a word that sounds vaguely like a racial epithet, or who is asked to step out of his home by a white cop, reads bigoted motives into the situations. Okay, now one last thing. Add to this how many blacks are raised hearing people like Jeremiah Wright demonize white people, and it explains something else. We've all heard the shtick about how only whites can be racist, right? Well, this perspective makes sense if you view the object of your hatred as truly evil, because then, in your eyes, your feelings aren't actually prejudice, are they? They can't be, because you'll view them as having a basis in reality. I mean, you have a right to hate evil, right? So, who really is prejudiced? Who really has drawn conclusions that have no basis in reality? If I'm wrong in what I've said, then sure, perhaps it's me. But if I'm right, then I've just explained for you the Gateses, Lowrys, and Wrights of the world. And the Obamas. If I'm right, it means we've put someone who's hung up, and perhaps hateful, in the White House. Michael, thank you for having me on the show, and God bless you and your audience.
Thoughtful article, Selwyn. Thanks for being on the Savage Nation.
Savage.
No one else can say it that clear and that precise. And he has passion, of course.
The Savage Nation. Weekday afternoons 3 to 7. Talk 910. KNEW.
Go to michaelsavage.com. If you missed it last week, you're going to see it this week. A new defamation letter to the British government. Now, look, let's back up for a minute. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown was behind releasing the Lockerbie bomber. Okay, there's a letter from Muammar Gaddafi thanking his friend Prime Minister Brown, saying thank you for releasing him on Ramadan. But the same Gordon Brown is the man who put Michael Savage on a list of real terrorists and real murderers, and I'm only a talk show host. Now, how do you put two and two together? How do you put two and two together? They release an actual murderer who masterminded the killing of over 200 people, but they refuse to release Michael Savage, even though their own emails say that Michael Savage has never encouraged violence and that it would be good to put his name on the list because it will balance who is on the list. Don't you see this is coming from Saudi Arabia or another Arab country? And that's why I was quoted in the Washington Times on michaelsavage.com, where I say we are ripe for the loss of our freedom. Read it. Also on michaelsavage.com from the Washington Examiner, Obama's Veterans Administration pulls the so-called death book from their website. You will not believe this. It's a controversial, discontinued, 53-page pamphlet on end-of-life issues for wounded soldiers, which sort of encourages them to kill themselves. That's correct. There is a death book that Obama has finally had to pull. It encouraged veterans in wheelchairs to think about whether they'd be better off dead or alive. Well, after all, a soldier in a wheelchair is nothing but a drain on the economy. Just ask Rahm Emanuel's brother. Also on michaelsavage.com, why are Americans mad? It's big government, stupid. Don't miss this story. You know the photographer you may have heard about, Annie Leibovitz, the great famous photographer? Well, she's the photographer of the stars, and she faces ruin because she overspent. But what you don't know is that her lover, who died years ago, Susan Sontag, once called white people a cancer on the human race. That gives you some idea of what liberals are all about. My question is, will Bernie Madoff be released to Scotland? It turns out that he's dying of cancer. Well, perhaps Obama will give him a compassionate, merciful early release, and Scotland will take him in. I think he should be sent to Libya. And for those of you who think that the immigrants that are coming in are all sacred and they know more than you do because you're merely a white person who has some primitive notion of religion through God, Cambodian village worships a cow with reptilian skin. Incredible. And by the way, Maxine Waters, you know that character, don't you? She calls opponents of socialized hacker attack on the Savage website. Could the Brits have done it? Well, I don't know, because over the weekend my website was hacked by unknown individuals. MichaelSavage.com was inaccessible to listeners and fans as a result of this attack. And while it's impossible to tell exactly where this attack came from, I want you to keep in mind it could have originated in any part of the world. It's very interesting, though, that this attack should come just hours after the release of the Lockerbie bomber, the terrorist al-Magri, by the Scottish and British governments. Now, the question arises, who would have the motivation to shut down MichaelSavage.com? Who wants Michael Savage to stop attacking the British government when his radio show now reaches an international audience? Who would have the resources to carry out such an attack? It may not be possible to prove who was involved, but I have a simple question for you doubting Thomases. Is it not possible that the British government carried out the cyber attack? Or is this something that they would never stoop to? Well, I'll let the Savage Nation decide. They release the Lockerbie bomber, but they imprison Michael Savage. And now the media with the Michael Jackson circus again. Why? Well, just when Obama's poll numbers have reached an all-time low, just as real Americans are shouting out the loudest against the advancement of socialist medicine and czars and whatnot, just when the left wing in this country seem to be on the defensive, bingo, the left-wing media comes to their rescue. Today, in a clear attempt to silence arguments against Obamacare, the lowlifes in the media have decided to cover nothing but the fact that Michael Jackson's death has been declared a homicide. Do I care? You know, a little bit. Because I do know how to relax. And when I do go out, I know how to relax when I go out. And it's very rare. Maybe once a week I'll go out and, you know, I sit and relax, have a bottle of wine. Actually, I'm drinking wine again. If you want to talk about alcohol, I mean, it leaves me with a hangover, but it feels good going down. Isn't that interesting? Why does wine, no matter what I drink, leave me with a hangover, but beer or vodka doesn't? It's an interesting I know the answer. It's the complexities, the fusel oils in wine. No matter what you get today, it's been tricked up in the winemaker's chemistry laboratory. They're not making wine the way. It's all like chemicals now, chemistry. But I had, Friday night after the show, I went over to Alioto's. I hadn't been there in a while. And Richie prepared for me himself. He went in the kitchen. I mean, it's one of the busiest kitchens you ever see. I remember when I was a kid, there was a restaurant in New York called Mama Leone's. And they used to turn out, I don't know, thousands of meals a night or something like that. And I used to marvel at it. I once read a book about how in the heck could anyone cook. So I try to cook a meal for a couple of people, and to get the bread and the meal and everything on the table at once is very hard. So how do you do it for hundreds of people at a time over and over again? So every time I go in the kitchen of a very busy restaurant, I'm always awed by it, frankly, because it's amazing the skill it takes to produce everything and come out on time. So I ordered mussels marinara, which I got to tell you, there's no better mussels marinara in the world that I've tried than in that restaurant, Alioto's. You say, well, why am I talking about it? Because I'm sick and tired of talking about the ACLU. I'm sick and tired of telling you what Obama's doing to America. I'm sick and tired of talking to myself and nobody else about being banned in Britain. I'm sick of telling you to go buy Banned in Britain. You know what? Don't buy the book. Do buy the book. It's not going to change, my life one way or the other. I want you to read Banned in Britain so that you can see the story, the modern-day story of David versus Goliath. And I don't know how this ends. Don't you understand it's not over yet? Don't you understand that the story isn't over? It's an ongoing story. It's a work in progress. That's what I'm saying to you. And by buying the book and by owning the book, you're a part of this history. So I can only sustain this for so long.
Savage. Michael Savage. Afternoons 3 to 7 on Talk 910 KNEW and online at 910KNEW.com.